Everyone thinks the world's greatest jewel thieves are young, tech-savvy criminals. The men who stole £14 million from London's most secure vault were all drawing pensions. On the morning of April 3, 2015, staff at the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited arrived to find something that shouldn't have been possible. The vault, a reinforced chamber that had survived the blitz that had held the crown jewels themselves, had been breached. Someone had drilled through 3 feet of reinforced concrete and steel. They'd taken jewelry, gold, diamonds. The initial estimate was staggering, £14 million. The police had no leads. No fingerprints, no CCTV footage that made sense. What they didn't know yet was that they were looking for men in their 60s and 70s. The accepted story, the one that made headlines for months, was that this was a professional job, organized crime, Eastern European specialists. The kind of operation that takes years of planning, military-grade equipment, insider knowledge. The vault had been untouched since 1975. It was supposed to be impenetrable, so whoever did this had to be extraordinary. That's what everyone believed. That's what made sense. Except it was almost entirely wrong. I've read the police statements myself. What emerged over the investigation was far stranger than the initial theory. The men weren't professional thieves from some criminal syndicate. They were pensioners. One was a retired jeweler. Another, a former safe-breaker who'd gone legitimate decades ago. Another was a diamond dealer in his 60s. These weren't young men hungry for glory. They were old men with one last job in mind. The leader was Brian Reeder. At 76 years old, he'd spent his entire life around safes and diamonds. In the 1970s, he'd been a career criminal, the kind of man who knew every vault in London by reputation. But that was decades ago. He'd gone straight, or so everyone thought. Alongside him was Terry Perkins, John Collins, Daniel Jones, and Carl Wood. None of them were spring chickens. Most had legitimate businesses or pensions. Most had families. Most had grandchildren. What possessed them to attempt something like this? The answer lies in timing. These men weren't getting younger. Their businesses weren't what they used to be, and they knew something about Hatton Garden that few others did. The vault's security systems were aging. The cameras were old. The locks, while formidable, were mechanical. To a man who'd spent 50 years studying safes, it wasn't impossible. It was, in fact, almost irresistible. The planning took months. They studied the building. They watched the routines. They noted that over the Easter weekend, the vault would be unmanned for 4 days straight. No guards, no surveillance checks, just a locked door and a prayer that nobody would try anything stupid. That was their window. Over the Easter weekend of 2015, these pensioners set to work. They rented a small office in the building next door. They smuggled in equipment piece by piece. A concrete drill, a thermal imaging camera, crowbars. They worked methodically without hurry. They knew they had time. On the night of April 2nd, they began drilling. The drill was loud, so loud that neighbors heard it. But it was Easter weekend. Most people were away. The building was quiet. They drilled for hours. By morning, they'd broken through the outer wall. By the next day, they'd navigated past the secondary barriers. The vault's 3-foot-thick concrete shell was no match for patience and expertise. They worked in shifts. Some men kept watch. Others drilled and cleared debris. It was meticulous, almost surgical, and it was working. By April 4th, they'd reached the inner chamber. They bypassed the final locks that would have stumped younger men with less experience. But Brian Reeder had been doing this since the 1960s. His hands knew what to do. In the early hours of April 4th, they entered the vault. What they found inside was beyond their expectations. Not just jewelry, diamonds, gold bars, cash, artwork. Decades of accumulated wealth stored in safe deposit boxes. They spent hours inside. They knew exactly which boxes to take. They'd done their research. They knew which belonged to wealthy dealers, to collectors, to families with insurance. They filled bags methodically. They didn't ransack the place. They didn't spray paint slogans or leave messages. They simply took what they came for and left. By dawn on April 5th, they were gone. The vault was sealed behind them. No one would notice until Monday morning. The escape was nearly perfect. They'd covered their tracks. They'd worn gloves. They'd disabled what cameras they could. But here's where the real story shifts. Here's where these aging criminals made the mistake that would undo them. They talked. They celebrated, and they used the internet. One of the gang members, Danny Jones, had a son-in-law who was a small-time criminal. Jones bragged to him about the job. The son-in-law talked to others. Within weeks, rumors were circulating in London's underworld. By May, the police had names. By June, they had arrests. By July, they had confessions. The entire operation, meticulously planned, expertly executed, unraveled because men in their 70s couldn't resist the urge to brag. The trial revealed something unexpected about human nature. These men weren't greedy, they weren't malicious, they were old, they were afraid of irrelevance. They wanted one last moment where they mattered, where their skills meant something, where they could pull off something nobody else could. The heist itself was magnificent. It was the aftermath that was human and fragile. Brian Reeder received 6 years. Terry Perkins got 6 years. John Collins, Daniel Jones, Carl Wood, they all received sentences ranging from 5 to 6 years. It wasn't the sentence that mattered, it was that they were caught. The perfect crime, executed by men with nothing left to prove, unraveled because of the one thing they couldn't control themselves. Recovery efforts took months. Some items were never found. Some remain lost to this day. The insurance companies paid out claims. The wealthy owners of the deposit boxes moved on. But the story lingered in London's criminal history not as a triumph of criminal enterprise, but as a reminder of something more poignant: the desire to matter, to prove yourself one last time even when the best days are behind you. The Hatton Garden job wasn't the greatest heist because of its execution, though it was executed brilliantly. It was the greatest because it revealed something true about ambition and age and the things we're willing to risk when we feel time slipping away. These weren't criminals, they were craftsmen, and they proved one last time that they were the best at what they did. The law just proved it first. Subscribe, there's a new unsolved case and historical heist every week, and you won't want to miss the ones that reveal how crime actually works.